Alright, y'all. So today I wanted to give you my quick thoughts and opinions on the recent Superman film that just came out, James Gunn's Superman. I was able to finally see it this past weekend and just wanted to kind of give my initial thoughts based on a one-time viewing. Um, so as y'all know, I'm very excited for this film. I kind of gave my initial final thoughts on the film before I saw it. Um, and I've been very excited for this movie. Not only because it's a Superman movie, right? Superman is probably one of my favorite characters of all time in fiction. But in general, James Gunn is a very solid filmmaker, right? He has a good track record of comic book films. This film is supposed to be the springboard of a brand new DC cinematic universe. And, like I said, I have a good feeling about all this stuff, right? I'm really hoping that it can be done well and it can be knocked out the park. It'll be definitely a good rival to Marvel. And I'm gonna kind of split this video up into like a non-spoiler and a spoiler section. So for non-spoilers, my initial thoughts on this movie, I think for the most part, this is a very good film. I thought that James Gunn absolutely understood who Superman was as a character, what he's supposed to do, what he represents. I walked out this theater thinking he really got Superman. And that was like my number one thing about this movie, right? That was really the number one thing. James Gunn really had to nail it. Like, did he understand Superman? Did Superman feel like Superman at the end of the day, right? And I think he completely understood the assignment. It really was really well done with his character. David Cornsweet does an amazing job in the character. I thought that he did a fantastic job. He's very expressive. He's very shouty, but he's also shows a lot of emotion and compassion for people and caring. And like I said, this is still a very young Superman in his career, but I thought that he represented that very well. I thought that the actor who played Lex also did a fantastic job as Lex Luthor. I thought that he completely nailed the role. He understood the assignment. Um, Other characters that were great, I thought that Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner's Green Lantern was fantastic. I think he was probably like one of the funniest dudes in the movie for me. I think every line he said, I chuckled at a little bit because he was really funny. He represented Guy Gardner perfectly. Um, Mr. Terrific too, the actor who played him. Sorry, the name of the actor is kind of I'm forgetting the name of it off the top of my head, but he was really great in this movie. I thought that he was really funny with his deadpan expressions and humor, and his like relationship with Superman was hilarious. I thought that, like I said, I think the out of all this whole movie, I feel like he could be like really a great candidate for like a spin-off show or something. But he was really good in this film. I thought he was fantastic. I thought that Lois Lane in this movie, her actress did a very good job. And the other actors too, like Jimmy Olsen, I was surprised by him of how much of a role he had in this movie. Really funny, really funny. I thought that his performance was good. I thought that Lois Lane was really good. There wasn't really any like strikingly bad performances in this movie. There's just some characters here that the actors aren't really given too much to do and like not as a lot of time to shine as their roles. Like for example, I thought the actor who played Perry White did a good job, but he just doesn't get much to do in this movie, right? Um, I also thought Crypto was really funny. I was shocked how good Crypto was in this movie just because he's like really that relatable as a dog. Like if y'all ever had dogs and like I know that a lot of people in America do have dogs, but if y'all ever had like an animal like a pet or even like an animal like a dog or a cat, excuse me, like you will totally get Crypto. And he's really funny. He's like a major part of this movie and I thought he worked extremely well, especially with the tone, and I thought the CGI was really well done. So overall, for my nine-spoiler opinions, I thought it was a very good Superman film. Not perfect, definitely has some pacing issues and story issues, but I'll get into that more with the spoilers. But overall, it's a very solid film. A good beginning. All right, so now for my spoiler section. Like I mentioned earlier, I thought this was a very good film. I thought this was a very solid Superman film. I think James Gunn completely understood who Superman was. I think that his compassion and saving people in this movie is one of his best attributes. I think I heard some people say online that him saving people in this movie felt like almost too much of a reaction to something like Man of Steel. But I really didn't see it like that. I thought that, that's just something Superman would naturally do. He even saves like a squirrel in this movie out of all things. And I just think, yeah, that's a totally Superman thing he would do. And David Cornsweet does a great job at playing this character. And he just, overall, the Superman in this movie felt like Superman. He really embodied the character and what he represents, which I just have to say, just really love that part of it. I thought that the CGI and action scenes in this film were really good. The CGI to me, I think some people say it looked fake. I thought it looked fine. I think it looked solid enough. I mean, like I said, this film and this universe that James Gunn has set up for this movie is a very comic book universe. This whole movie feels like the most comic book Superman film ever made, live action wise, right? Like this film is clearly set in a universe that's been lived in, filled with metahumans, filled with goofy stuff like giant kaijus running around in Metropolis. Kind of a normal thing that some of the characters react to as in this universe, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that Superman always in his nature has been a little bit campy. I think too, especially in this film, how he like portrays himself with the trunks, completely works for me. Right now, I'm personally neutral on the trunks, but I really like them in this version just because I think it more embodies this version of the character more consistently. Right. But like I said, the action scenes were very good. I love, especially I think probably my favorite one was the fight between the engineer and Ultraman. That was really good, especially in the ballpark and in the sewer. The whole final, and then especially at the end with the fight with the Raptors, Lex's Raptors. Really good stuff. I think that was my favorite action scenes in the movie. James Gunn's action scenes at first can seem pretty chaotic and kind of hard to follow, but I think he created this film with a very interesting and shot in like a very interesting kinetic style. Like the camera is always moving with the characters as they're doing all this crazy stuff, and it does feel like overwhelming naturally to the senses at first. Especially when I watched this movie like at the beginning of it, but overall I really got used to it, and I think it added a lot of character and dimension to these fight scenes. Right, I wouldn't say that these fight scenes are as explosive and world ending as like Zack Snyder's fight scenes were in Man of Steel. Um, but like I said, James Gunn is trying to make more superhero like fight scenes here. Superman does his best not to create casualties during these fights, which I really have to appreciate. Like I said, it just makes a lot of makes a lot of sense. It's a total Superman thing to do. Um, I think all the performances, like I said, were really good. Um, and I thought the story and the general gist of the story was very good as well. The movie can move at a million miles per hour, and that's one of my slight problems with this film. I think the biggest core issues with this movie for me is it has some pacing issues. It sometimes moves a bit too quick, especially in like the first quarter of the movie. But once you like really like keep watching it and get investing into the characters, it gets better and better as it goes along for sure. Not a huge detriment to the film. And then probably my second is James Gunn's. Like I said, this is a very established world. This movie to me kind of reads as like a volume two to like a volume one comic book series. Like it feels like we're reading something and we kind of missed the beginning, like the setup. Now I totally get skipping the traditional origin. We've seen it many times in Superman, especially in movies. I wasn't too upset about that. I think that the only issue I have with the fact that we're skipping over so much material and backstory here is just because um, I do think, like I said, this is a new version of these characters. I think James Gunn should have given a bit more context and background to some of these characters, like Lex Luthor and Superman's relationship, right? I do think needs a little bit more background for these versions of these characters. The Justice Gang and Superman's relationship, the Justice Gang as a whole, just more, more background, more more context for these events, right? Um, just a bit more context and backstory for some of the characters here. I think personally could have gone a long way to improve the pacing and some of the, like I said, structural issues that this movie has. I wouldn't say that if you watch this movie though, like I watched it with a person that had, like I said, knew nothing about comic books, knew nothing really about Superman except the very bone basics, and they totally got everything that this movie was trying to say. So I think that James Gunn at least still does like explain a lot of things that absolutely need to be explained. Like, I think the general gist of, like, oh, Lex is a bad guy, you can tell, or oh, these superhero people have been with Superman for a while. Everything that I think absolutely needs to be explained is explained here, but like I said, I think more context and backstory would have helped. But other than that, those are my really two core issues with this movie. That's why it kind of, to me, brings it down a bit in terms of its quality. But the story itself, overall, is pretty great. I really enjoy the story being told here. Lex's plan is a total Lex thing to do. He's always conniving and controlling things from the background, and even in this case, actually fighting Superman himself using predetermined fight moves. I love that a detail. That's like a total Lex thing he would do because, like I said, he's such an egomaniac in this movie. I love it. I also thought that the general core. My favorite part about this movie is some of the changes they made to the Superman lore. That is the biggest change. Is excuse me, the revelation about Clark's alien Kryptonian parents. Jor-El and I think I think Laura. I forget her name, but in most Superman continuities, and this is coming from a perspective that I've read some of the comics, I've seen all the movies of Superman, obviously. I'm not like a complete aficionado of Superman. Like, I haven't seen Smallville and I haven't read every comic, right? But in most versions I have seen, like 99%, their parents from Krypton are depicted as good people. They give good guidance and advice to Superman. That's where Superman builds his foundation of his belief and his belief in humanity from, right? When he learns about his real parents and all that, and it just kind of adds him on the foundation of his real Smallville parents. In this movie, they do something quite interesting. They set up that in the beginning, Superman has his Fortress of Solitude, which is obviously very established. I also love the fact too that Clark cares about his robots, which is a total like all-star Superman thing to pull from, but I really enjoy them in the movie. And I also like how the Fortress of Solitude constantly changes location. I feel like that makes more sense for his base in general than like in typical continuities where it just kind of stands in one place, right? Regardless, they established that Superman gets a message from his real parents that was sent with him on the ship to Earth, but half the message, he gets only half of it because the other half gets corrupted and he can't figure out what they're saying. But the other half is translated to, we love you, Kal-El. Be strong, be motivated. Basically being, the loving parents that we all usually see him. Of course, then Lex breaks into the fortress in this movie, which is, like I said, a total Lex Luthor comic book thing to happen in this movie. Pretty good action sequence too when he breaks in. I think that was like a totally well done scene. It's kind of revelation to why he gets in later on, but he finds the other half of the message and uses his like technology to decode it. And in this film, they make it clear this was like authentic. Like, this wasn't tampered by Lex Luthor. And I had some people, especially after I watched the movie, said, "Wait, Lex had the tamper right. That is no way that his parents would have said that." But even though in the movie they make it pretty clear that's what they said. They said that basically the other half of the message says that Superman, like Kal-El, you need to rule over Earth with no mercy, right? Show no mercy, have multiple wives, be a harem, spread the Kryptonian bloodline. Obviously, a very antagonistic message, a message that is used to provoke war of an alien being coming to Earth. And basically, Lex uses this, like, originally kind of, he was going to go into the Fortress of Solitude to find a way to beat Superman, but this basically hands it right to Lex. He uses this basically to arrest Superman in the film and put him in his pocket dimension. Um, and basically, it's like a shock to everyone, right? Like, what? His parents said to rule over them? And it's even more of a shock, obviously, to Clark, right? I mean, he never knew anything about this. And the fact that his real parents are saying that he needs to do all these things. And, you have the whole pocket dimension stuff happen in the film, which involves Mr. Terrific and Lois Lane breaking out Superman from that pocket dimension with the help of Metamorpho, which, by the way, I really liked his character in the film. I thought he was really well done. And that whole action sequence, especially with the Raptors and that whole, like, proton river and black hole scene, so crazy. Like, really comic booky, but also really fun. I really enjoyed that action sequence. Regardless, I also think it's hilarious too the other things that like Lex has in this unstable pocket dimension, which is like a total comic book thing too, like pocket dimensions in general. But I love how he has like these monkeys like promoting hate against Superman. I feel like there's definitely some commentary James Gunn is trying to say about people online. Regardless, he gets back, right? And he goes back to Smallville. And one of my favorite parts of this movie, from what I remember, and talks, Clark talks to his real Earth parents, Martha and Jonathan Kent here, who are alive in this continuity. And, Jonathan basically talks to Clark that, we as parents we give him the tools so that he can make his own decisions and make his own choices. We give him the ideals, we give him the good messages, right? But we don't like persuade and force their son to do anything. It's their choice, right? Something along those lines. I could be misremembering it, but basically presenting the fact that while Superman's real parents were saying that he should do this, his real parents or Earth parents obviously they gave him good ideals. They gave him things to strive for, obviously. But Clark and Superman are making his own decisions. He chooses to be a savior to humanity. He chooses to be a good person, a caring and compassionate person, someone to save people, to become this heroic figure that's not domineering or trying to take over the planet per se, but someone that's trying to be a superhero, taking care of people and who really can't take care of themselves in certain situations, right? And that's really to me the crux of this movie. That's to me where I think, wow, James Gunn really clicked with Superman in this film. Like he totally got it. Amazing. Just I think personally, I thought that was a really interesting, obviously crazy deviation from traditional Superman lore. I know some people are going to say, well, they've done that before. I've heard some rumblings online they may have done that in Smallville, but like I said, I've only seen the movies. I've only read most of the major comics that I've read to have traditionally Superman's parents as being good people. So to me, it was just kind of a shock that they would do something like this. Regardless, I loved it. I thought it was a very cool and interesting deviation from the Superman War. I thought that it really showed who Superman was as a person, the crux of what makes him who he is and why he's so important and great. And that to me really clicked in this film. I really enjoyed that part of the movie. I think it showed a really interesting arc, especially at the end of the film where he's in the fortress again, Superman, and has instead, in the beginning, he was showing images or hearing the audio of his parents. That's kind of soothed him, right? While in the end, he shows images of his real parents, his Earth parents, that helped soothe him. Um, Great, like I said, great arc there. Great and interesting deviation from events. I thought that was a really interesting showcase here. Another great thing, like I said, I like the whole Lex plot at the end, especially with the pocket dimensions and them breaking open a rift in the earth and showing a black hole. That whole fight scene was pretty cool. The whole revelation with Ultraman being Superman's clone. I know some people online were thinking this was going to be Henry Cavill, and I personally was hoping, like, I was praying that wasn't going to be the case because that just would have been really dumb. But thank God it isn't. It's just a clone of Superman, which, like I said, gives context to the events in the beginning of how he got into the fortress because the DNA. And overall, I thought that was a really cool, fun fight scene, especially between Ultraman and Superman. I thought it was really good, especially with the engineer involved too. It was my favorite fight scene in the film. When he fights the Raptors, it's a crazy, really cool sequence, and I like the final confrontation between Lex Luthor and Superman. Like I think, especially when he's like, like yeah, I'm an alien, but I'm also a human. Like I feel, I think, I feel, and I love. Like really good stuff. A really like Superman thing to say. I also think too Lex getting kind of like debunked and destroyed by the Daily Planet, especially the whole subplot with Jimmy Olsen and them figuring out how Lex Luthor's doing all this. Turns out the war, especially with Bulgaria and the other country, forget the name of it. Starts with a J. How basically Lex wanted to manipulate that war and situation to make his own country and all this gets basically revealed with Jimmy Olsen being a ladies' man to like Lex's like girlfriend, who like I said he betrays and throws in prison because he was like texting this she was texting this other guy, I thought it was a hilarious and interesting subplot. I think it adds a lot of context. And the Daily Planet publishing a scathing article against Lex Luthor, total Daily Planet thing to happen, and I really enjoyed it. And I also thought the whole war thing between the two made up countries, like I said, a lot of commentary about social politics today here, but I thought it was really well done. I also like the Justice Gang. I thought they all did very good jobs in the film, especially at the end, where I feel like at the end they even learned something from Superman a bit, and they come help save and de-escalate that war situation. I thought that was really well done. Um, Good part of the movie for sure. Especially when Hot Girl drops that evil president dude. That was kind of a crazy sequence in general, but it was really good. Trying to think what else that was positive that I could say about this film. Lex getting arrested at the end, like I said, total thing that happens makes a lot of sense. I do think him, like the media turning against him so heavily, I do think was a little bit weird, especially since the whole situation with the real revelations about what Clark's parents said, like his alien parents said. Um, I do think people get over that a little too quick, but like I said, I do think it's exaggerated a little bit because we need to wrap up the movie, and this is also in general just a more fantastical comic book world. So I kind of I'm fine with that detail. And overall, and then we also have the crazy cameos in the film. Like I said, I mentioned I liked Crypto a lot in this film. Thought he was really funny, very relatable to people who have dogs. Like in movies, I feel like people over exaggerate how cute dogs are, and they're so friendly. Well, most times, like dogs are really just like they destroy a lot of your shit, and they're annoying. Um, Total thing with Crypto here. I thought it was really funny. Um, the surprise Supergirl appearance in the movie, I actually had no idea. I assumed that she might be in a post-credit scene, and to be honest with you, I feel like she should have been. But her appearance at the end of the movie is fine. Just basically establishes her character a bit that she's kind of a crazy, young, drunk, wild party girl, right? Who kind of goes to different, planets and stuff. And I guess Crypto's her dog. The owner of the dog is actually Supergirl. Superman was just watching over the dog, which I think was pretty hilarious. But from what I've seen, a small cameo, it's fine. I mean, I think it works in the film overall. I just do think it's a bit jarring how she kind of just shows up. Um, and what else can I say about this movie? I think there's probably a million other things I can say. I think the comedy was pretty good. The writing was pretty solid, despite some pacing issues, and I do think there should have been more background to the story overall. I still think this is a very solid and good film, especially a Superman film overall. I think James Gunn absolutely delivered on the assignment. I'm very excited to see what potential plans he has for future movies, and I don't know. I feel like to me, like when I compare this, especially to like Man of Steel, I think it's a more of a solid Superman film than that film ever was, at least in my opinion. But overall, that was my quick thoughts on James Gunn's Superman. Peace.